As many of my longtime subscribers know, I grew up watching the WWF in the 90s. Now, to me, that era of professional wrestling that I grew up watching, or as they prefer to call it now, sports entertainment, that era was the best the business has ever seen. The WWF will never return to that level of popularity and influence. The Monday Night Wars, the battle between the WWF and WCW, it fueled the level of creativity between both brands. As a 12, 13-year-old kid, it was captivating television. Everyone at school was watching wrestling on Monday nights. Now, during his prime, Vince McMahon was absolutely brilliant at creating new stars. Around 1996, maybe 1997, the WWF recruited a young man by the name of Dwayne Johnson. Now, physically speaking, this dude was the perfect professional wrestler. The problem was he wasn't ready to be a sports entertainer. Vince McMahon was automatically obsessed with Dwayne Johnson. His creative boner was standing at full attention. He wanted his audience to fully embrace him. So what did he do? Did he allow Dwayne Johnson to be himself and get over with the audience organically? Did he slowly introduce him to the audience and let people get used to him? No. He gave him this goofy ass name, Rocky Maivia. He made him be this constantly smiling, inauthentic dork. He pushed him so hard that in a matter of weeks, the audience completely turned on him. They were chanting, "Die, Rocky, die." Fast forward a year or so later, Rocky Maivia embraces the hatred from the crowd. Vince McMahon finally allows him to be himself instead of being some vanilla happy-go-lucky beta male. Rocky Maivia becomes The Rock, arguably one of the best characters in the history of the business. Today, he's one of the highest grossing actors in Hollywood. But the point is, this process, it had to happen gradually. It had to happen organically. When Rocky Maivia was forced on the audience, they rejected him. When he was allowed to be himself, when he was allowed to act naturally and be authentic, they embraced him. Right now, ESPN's making the same exact mistake with Malika Andrews that Vince McMahon made with Dwayne Johnson 25 years ago. Matter of fact, ESPN should know better. What's that old saying? The definition of insanity is trying the same thing multiple times and expecting different results. That is exactly what ESPN is doing. We have seen this movie before. We already know the ending. The result, always the same. This movie ends in huge embarrassing failure. ESPN has tried the same formula over and over and over again. The formula I'm talking about is heavily promoting unqualified people. They're not promoted based on talent. They're not promoted based on their ability to draw and relate to an audience. They are only promoted because of equity and diversity. ESPN tried this formula with Katie Nolan. Failure. The thinking back then was, since Katie Nolan is popular on social media, she would be able to leverage that same popularity into television ratings. What ESPN failed to realize, though, lonely men, they preferred to spank the wanker looking at pictures of Katie Nolan. As soon as she opened that toxic facial orifice, those boners became flaccid. ESPN tried the same thing 2 years ago with Maria Taylor. How'd that work out? Last I checked, Maria Taylor was embarrassing herself every week, destroying the Sunday night pregame show on NBC. And who could forget the inspiration for the term huge embarrassing failure? The undisputed, undefeated heavyweight champion of embarrassing failure, Bomani Jones. ESPN spent millions of dollars forcing their audience to accept Bomani Jones. Now, of course, longtime viewers of this channel, they know exactly how that worked out. Over the last 10 years, Bomani Jones put together a resume of huge embarrassing failure that will never be matched in the media. Now, what do all three of these failures have in common? They are no longer collecting woke welfare from ESPN. Both Katie Nolan and Bomani Jones were fired. Well, KC, that simply isn't true. Their contracts expired. Yeah. That's called getting fired. And Maria Taylor, she used ESPN to destroy the career of Rachel Nichols and get herself a massive contract from NBC. But the question is, will this same thing happen with Malika Andrews? I'll go ahead and give you an early prediction. Yes. 2 or 3 years from now, Malika Andrews will either be demoted or no longer collecting woke welfare from ESPN. For years now, NBA fans like myself, we have complained about the NBA coverage at ESPN. I like the coverage on NBA TV. I love the team that Bally Sports put together for local games in New Orleans. Obviously, the NBA coverage on TNT, best in the business. And then you've got ESPN. ESPN's coverage of the NBA, absolutely atrocious. Hell, this network covers the WNBA better than they cover the NBA. Executives at ESPN, they have heard our complaints and they have decided to do something about it. We hear the complaints from our dwindling audience. We are committed to improving our coverage of the NBA. They started by dismantling the popular team of Mark Jackson, Jeff Van Gundy, and Mike Breen. Now, me personally, I was never a fan of Mark Jackson or Jeff Van Gundy. Mike Breen, I thought he was excellent though. But when overhauling your coverage of the NBA, the one thing that needed to be left alone was their primary broadcast team. This trio was extremely popular amongst the fan base. What does ESPN do? Now you got to remember, this network is struggling. ESPN is literally hemorrhaging viewers. They take the one thing people like about their NBA coverage and they completely destroy it. They replace Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy with Doris Burke and Doc Rivers. Look, I like Doris Burke. I really do, but how in the hell is this team supposed to work? How are you going to have two play-by-play broadcasters on the same broadcast? Who's going to be the lead? It's obvious what ESPN's doing here. They were infusing diversity into their primary broadcast team. The one thing we're missing in our coverage of the NBA Finals is a female's touch. I don't remember anyone asking for that. Their next step, though, was to overhaul the pre- and post-game show. Last couple of years, Mike Greenberg hosted the NBA Finals. I'm sure you see the problem there. This show lacks diversity. How can ESPN have the white man covering a league that doesn't have white players? ESPN decided to rectify the problem by giving their NBA coverage a double dose of diversity with Malika Andrews. Racial minority, check. Woman, check. I'm sure they would have preferred a man pretending to be a woman, but those are in short supply, so ESPN, they settled for Malika Andrews. And look, this is nothing against Malika Andrews, but this has huge, embarrassing failure written all over it. Over the last 3 years, ESPN has been desperately trying to get their audience to accept Malika Andrews. They took the promotional cucumber off the back of Bomani Jones and strapped it onto Malika Andrews. Just think about this. Malika Andrews is 28 years old. It took Rachel Nichols 20 years to reach the level of experience needed to cover the NBA Finals. And you mean to tell me Malika Andrews is ready after 3 years? She goes from being a sideline reporter in 2020, where she spent time in the bubble in Orlando covering the plague of mythical racism. She parlayed that into hosting NBA Today, the show that used to be hosted by Rachel Nichols. You know, someone who is actually qualified to cover the NBA. And look, I'm not saying Malika Andrews lacks talent. Unlike Maria Taylor, Malika Andrews is a talented broadcaster. What I'm saying is she lacks experience. The only reason Malika Andrews was given this promotion is because of equity and diversity, or as they used to call it, affirmative action. She hosted NBA Today for 2 years, and now she's hosting the NBA Finals? Let me show you what type of NBA coverage you can expect from Malika Andrews. Earlier this morning, I dug through my video files. I found some of Malika Andrews' best moments covering the NBA. Now, just to give you some context on one of these clips, one clip aired on ESPN right after the Celtics promoted Joe Mazzulla. Instead of talking about his qualifications, Malika Andrews goes back 13 years to talk about some bullshit drinking charge that he got in college. Why was that important to mention? Toxic masculinity. Malika Andrews never passes up the opportunity to tarnish the evil man. Black man, white man, doesn't matter. Orange man, doesn't matter. Malika Andrews is allergic to masculinity. Anyway, watch this compilation of clips. You tell me what any of this has to do with covering the NBA. Watch for yourself.
And now could become the NBA's youngest head coach at 34 years old. And we'd be remiss not to also mention that Mazzulla was arrested twice at West Virginia, once in 2008 for underage drinking and aggravated assault. He pled guilty, paid a fine, and then again in 2009 for domestic battery after an incident at Morgantown Bar. The domestic battery case never went to trial. But today, the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, declaring that the constitutional right to abortion, upheld for nearly a half century, no longer exists. And LeBron James retweeted former President Barack Obama, including this: today, the Supreme Court not only reversed nearly 50 years of precedent, it relegated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians, attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. We are all Black people. And so I wanted to make sure that we created some space for anything that we want to say here before we talk about basketball. I just want to say one thing, and I'm going to borrow it from MacArthur Fellow Jacqueline Woodson. And she said, "I'm heartbroken, but I'm not stunned. I'm angry, not irrational. I'm done, but not stopping." And that, to me, encapsulates so very well what so many people are feeling today. So take care of those around you. This is something that is a culmination of so many things, especially in Black America.
What the fuck does Kyle Rittenhouse have to do with the NBA? I've been watching the NBA for 30 years now. Not one time have I seen Kyle Rittenhouse dunk a basketball. Hell, I've never seen Kyle Rittenhouse at an NBA game. He seems to be the type of kid who plays Dungeons and Dragons with Star Trek nerds like Mike Freeman instead of watching the NBA. And what the hell does abortion have to do with covering the NBA? You know how many NBA players have had an abortion? None. Those clips I just showed you, all those took place in the last year. That is the NBA coverage you can expect from Malika Andrews. You know, part of me wants to feel bad for her. I have nothing against Malika Andrews. I mean, I don't agree with her politically. I think she's just another paid parrot like Stephen A. Smith, regurgitating viewpoints that her shit-fuck bosses want to be pushed. But going off of past history, Malika Andrews seems to be on the wrong career trajectory. ESPN's proven they do not have the ability to create stars. They got to go buy them like Pat McAfee. ESPN has proven anytime they heavily promote someone, anytime they force someone on their audience, it always ends in huge embarrassing failure. Do you really think Malika Andrews is the one who's going to change that trend? Seriously, who was the last star ESPN created? Stephen A. Smith? And I don't really give ESPN credit for that because they fired Stephen A. Smith. Skip Bayless is responsible for making Stephen A. Smith a superstar. So who is the last star ESPN created? I don't know. Seriously, I don't know one. Maybe Malika Andrews will prove me wrong. Maybe she has what it takes to capture the attention of NBA fans. But in order to do that, she's going to have to eradicate the woke fungus at ESPN. And I just don't see that happening since Malika Andrews is one of their talents that is heavily infected. But give me your thoughts. ESPN promotes an inexperienced Malika Andrews to hosting the NBA Finals. Translation, ESPN's NBA coverage just went from bad to worse. Hell, I forgot to mention that Malika Andrews will interrupt NBA coverage to talk about some meaningless facial hair counting contest in the WNBA dump. This has got disaster written all over it, but you prove me wrong. Sound off in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell to receive all notifications from the channel. Best way to contact me is by email at btlkc84@gmail.com, KC_BTL84 on Twitter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.